welcome back to Look Up on the Screen, a retrospective of Superman in cinema. Last time, I offered up my defense of Superman 3, a movie which I enjoyed, but which many people, Christopher Reeve included, did not. The lukewarm reception of Superman 3, plus growing dissatisfaction with working with the Salkinds, had caused Reeve to state publicly that he had no intention of returning to the role of Superman, and was content to leave the films as a trilogy. And apparently the Salkinds agreed with this decision. Superman 3 was nowhere near the hit they wanted, and they felt the series had perhaps run its course. Ilya Salkind, however, had one last idea that might reinvigorate the franchise. Make a movie about Superman's cousin, Supergirl. Now, Supergirl's history in the comics is a little convoluted, even by comic book standards. But to get you up to speed, here is a brief history of the character up until the point of the production of this film. There have been, in fact, several different Supergirls that have appeared in the comics over the decades, but here we're primarily concerned with Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El, daughter of Jor-El's brother. The character was created by Otto Binder and Al Plastino in 1959. Her origin story reveals that there had been other survivors of the destruction of Krypton in the form of Argo City, a shielded city that floated through space on an asteroid which formed after Krypton's destruction. Through one thing and another, it turned out Argo City was built on a bed of kryptonite, and as the mineral became irradiated, it started killing off the populace after a meteor storm caused damage to the lead shielding. Zor-El and his wife Allura sent their daughter Kara to Earth to be raised by her cousin. To help identify her to him, they gave her a uniform similar to Superman's own. How they actually know what Superman's costume looks like is never revealed, either in the comics and, as a result, in this movie. When Supergirl arrives on Earth, she discovers that she has the exact same powers as Superman and adopts a brunette wig and the identity of Linda Lee. She becomes a resident of the Midvale Orphanage and, at Superman's request, works in secret as Supergirl until she gets a better handle on her powers. As time goes on, she gets adopted by the Danvers family, becoming Linda Lee Danvers. She attends high school and college during this time and begins working openly as Supergirl. Now, this is all you really need to know to understand the character going into this film. There are dicier aspects of Supergirl's history that we'll get into, but in another episode. On the pre-production end of things, Ilya Salkind hired screenwriter David Odell to pen the script, instructing him once again to try to incorporate Brainiac into the proceedings and make it a sweeping, multi-planet epic. Scope-wise, Supergirl was promising to be more ambitious than the 3 Superman movies. Salkind even managed to get Christopher Reeve to verbally commit to making a cameo appearance in the film. On the directorial side of things, Jeannot Svark was tapped to fill the chair. Now, Svark had rather infamously taken over the direction of Jaws 2, which was blasted by critics and didn't do great at the box office. However, he had worked with Christopher Reeve on the time travel romance Somewhere in Time, and Reeve heartily recommended him. Svark was initially reluctant to take the job, feeling that they probably wanted someone more well-versed in Superman lore. But when he made a couple of suggestions, namely that 1, the focus for Supergirl should be on her grace over her strength, and 2, that the film should lean more heavily into fantasy than science fiction, Ilya Salkind agreed and Svark took the job. Unfortunately for Ilya, his sweeping interplanetary epic was not what he was going to end up producing. The original script called for Superman and Supergirl to meet initially, but through one thing and another, Superman would be sidelined by magic and turned into an old man, allowing his cousin to take center stage for the majority of the movie. However, at the last minute, Reeve bowed out, feeling that even 2 more scenes as the Man of Steel would be career suicide. Not only that, Warner Brothers again decreed that Brainiac was too obscure and demanded he be omitted from the script. Odell's sweeping alien landscapes would turn out to be cost-prohibitive to put on screen, and those were wiped as well, although the film did retain a sequence set in the so-far glimpsed, but never fully explored, Phantom Zone. In casting, Supergirl managed to snag several high-profile actors. Faye Dunaway, who had her own issues with the Salkinds, apparently put those aside as she was interested in pursuing a semi-comedic, scenery-chewing role similar to Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. Peter O'Toole was allegedly paid a handsome but undisclosed amount of money to play Zoltar, Kara's mentor in Argo City. Mia Farrow was cast as Allura, Kara's mother, for her scene at the beginning of the film. British comedian Peter Cook was cast as Nigel, Selina's on-again, off-again paramour / magic tutor, and Brenda Vaccaro was cast as Bianca, Selina's main henchwoman. To maintain continuity with the previous films in the series, since Reeve had bowed out, Mark McClure reprised his role as Jimmy Olsen and was revealed to be dating Lucy Lane, the heretofore unseen sister of Lois, played by Maureen Teefy. As for Supergirl herself, 19-year-old Helen Slater was cast in the role over Alexander Salkinds' objections, who insisted on giving the role to Brooke Shields. Years later, Ilya would state that maybe his father had a point. I personally don't agree. Slater is excellently suited for the role, approaching Supergirl with the right mix of childish wonder, delight with her new powers and Earth, and a similar gravitas to Supergirl that Reeve had given to Superman. Surprisingly, Supergirl was the smoothest Salkind production yet. Everyone involved was on board with Zvark's vision of making Supergirl a fantasy. Even Dunaway, who had a reputation for being hard to work with, got along with everyone, becoming friends with Brenda Vaccaro in the process. Helen Slater was unfazed by working with Peter O'Toole, who, along with the rest of the cast and crew, soon respected her for the amount of hard work she was putting into her first major film role. And the flying sequences are amazing in this movie. Unfortunately, when the movie was released in the US, several scenes, including Supergirl's first flight on Earth, were cut, which didn't help things much. Fortunately, if you find the movie on DVD these days, the international cut is what's available, restoring these scenes. Zvark wanted more in-frame exits and entrances in this movie, and the wire and harness team, along with Slater herself, worked overtime to make it happen. As a result, Supergirl has some of the best flying sequences in any of the Salkind-produced movies. Remember, this is pre-CGI, and while the stuff you're seeing on screen might not seem all that impressive, for the early 80s, this was a big advancement in these kind of effects. In fact, when Superman 4 director Sidney Furie called Richard Donner for advice on how to handle the flying sequences, Donner allegedly referred him back to Zvark, apparently considering the flying in Supergirl to be superior to that of his own movies. As far as the tone, the fantasy motif serves this movie well, giving it its own identity away from the movies that preceded it. Argo City looks much more fluid, open, and organic compared to the cold sterility of Krypton in the Superman series. The movie also implies that magic does exist and work in the universe of these films, and ironically, Selina seems to not be very good at it until she discovers the Omega Hedron, the power source for Argo City and the impetus for Supergirl to come to Earth. In an interesting twist, the movie implies that somehow, Zaltar brought the Kryptonian refugees to Argo from outer space to the subatomic world of inner space. Original plans for the movie intended to show Argo existing within a drop of water, but budget concerns nixed that idea. Instead, Supergirl arrives on Earth not from falling from the sky, but by emerging from a pond. For the shot of the emergence of Supergirl from the water, Zvark wanted it to seem like the water was tumbling off of Supergirl while she remained dry. Now, a number of techniques were tried with this, including running the film backwards and lowering Helen Slater into the lake. But unfortunately, none of them really looked right, until someone in the effects department had the idea of taking a life-size photograph of Slater in costume, tacking it to a piece of wood, and then yanking the sucker all the way out of the water extremely fast. The effect is convincing, but brief. There is, however, a place where the plot stumbles. After acquiring the Omega Hedron, Selina begins plotting out how to take over the world. She decides the best plan is to make everyone fall in love with her. She seemingly misinterprets the Omega Hedron activating as a sign she needs to seduce Ethan, a landscaper played by Hart Bachner, and make him her love slave. She puts a spell on him, intending him in the usual fairy tale fashion to fall in love with her when she's the first thing he sees. However, also in the usual fairy tale fashion, after he wanders dazed through town and is nearly abducted by a magically controlled bulldozer, or whatever the hell the actual term is for this piece of construction equipment, Supergirl rescues him, and no sooner does she open the bucket up, disguised as Linda Lee again, Ethan falls for her, pissing off Selina and rather reductively turning this whole movie into being about two women fighting over a not terribly bright dude. Now, admittedly, there is more to the movie than that, but yeah, this element is so far out in front and unsubtle that you can't really deny that's where the majority of the focus is. Eventually, after getting her plans thwarted by Supergirl repeatedly, Selina gets some reluctant help from Nigel, and after she knows how the magic wand he has works in conjunction with the Omega Hedron, Selina double-crosses him, takes over Midvale, and banishes Supergirl to the Phantom Zone. The Phantom Zone sequences are actually really good. The Phantom Zone looks nice and creepy and miserable, and the whole sequence is buoyed up by Slater and O'Toole's performances. Supergirl manages to convince Zaltar to tell her where the exit to the Phantom Zone is, and to go with her as they try to escape. Zaltar dies in the attempt, but Supergirl manages to get through the exit, back to Midvale, and face Selina once more. And honestly, even though the effects are dated, this is a fairly effective climax with Supergirl fighting a demonic manifestation of Selina's will. Of course, Selina's defeated, and it's implied she and Bianca are exiled to the Phantom Zone. Everything gets restored, and Supergirl takes off with the Omega Hedron to return home to Argo City. Ethan murmurs goodbye, Linda, as she flies away, implying that he figured out her secret identity, but really, who cares? Because one of the major flaws in this movie is that anybody who isn't Supergirl, Selina, Bianca, or Nigel is barely characterized at all, and Ethan himself is really more of a plot device than anything. In spite of all that, though, I really do like this movie. The international cut clarifies a lot of things the original US theatrical cut removed. The effects are amazing, even if there's a couple of places where the editing could be tighter. Everyone's committed to their roles, and honestly, they all look like they're having a lot of fun. Is it an all-time great movie? No. But with the passage of time, more and more people have come to enjoy it, and I'd argue that it could possibly deserve cult classic status that a lot of lesser 80s movies get. At the time of its release, though, Supergirl was a box office bomb, only earning $14 million against a $30 million budget. Advertising was almost nil, mostly because Warner's had declined on distributing the movie, causing the Salkinds to partner with TriStar to get the movie out into theaters. What little advertising there was played up the Superman connection more, which caused unfavorable comparisons, especially since Supergirl was deliberately going for a tone different from that of the Superman movies. Helen Slater sort of became the next victim of the Superman curse. She would only headline one more movie, The Legend of Billie Jean, before her career more or less resulted in her taking supporting roles in major motion pictures and several TV roles. She wound up playing Laura, Superman's biological mother, on Smallville, and currently has a recurring role as Dr. Eliza Danvers on CW's Supergirl series. If your only experience in seeing this movie is other people's reviews of it online, I encourage you to watch it for yourself and make up your own mind. Supergirl is a different animal than the Superman movies and a welcome change of pace. It leans more heavily on fantasy than sci-fi, and honestly, since revisiting it for this retrospective, I found a lot more to love than I originally did. The box office failure of Supergirl finally convinced the Salkinds that maybe the Superman franchise had run out of steam. However, they still held the film rights until 1999 and didn't really have anything they wanted to do with them. But then they hit upon an idea. Even though they personally didn't want to make another Superman movie, there might be others out there who would be willing to pay them for the right to do so. Which is what we're going to talk about next time as we finally reach what is widely considered the worst Superman film ever made. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. I'm Aaron Mills, reminding you to look up on the screen, and God help us all.